Dr. Ted Johnson from the Brennan Centre for Justice joined me from Washington, D.C. a little earlier. Ted, welcome back to Afternoon Briefing.
Thank you for having me back.
When claiming victory, Joe Biden declared it's a time to heal. What does that healing look like? What conversations need to be had? How do you kind of do that in a nation so divided?
Yeah, so it's going to be a tough trick to pull off for sure. It's been at least 4 years of pretty cantankerous relationships between Americans and our elected officials. So I think Biden's approach has to be twofold. One, because he spent so long in the legislative branch here in the United States, he has a lot of friendships across the aisle. So whereas previous administrations may have not been able to negotiate much, compromise much, sort of get along well with the other side, I think Biden has an advantage there, along with Kamala Harris coming fresh out of the Senate. So one step forward, one way forward will be to improve relations in Congress so that legislation can actually make its way out of the chamber. The other more difficult task, I think, is convincing the American people who have felt so divided across lines of party over the last 4 years, especially, but probably going back to at least Obama's administration, to convince them to trust one another yet again and to invest in the American project and put some of the ill feelings behind them in the interest of a more secure, stable nation that can function as it's supposed to.
Donald Trump has questioned the media's role in calling the president-elect and calling the election. But as we've been talking about on the show, that actually isn't new. That process isn't new. In fact, it even happened for his own election.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, this is sour grapes. This is, sort of being upset that the media called the election only because they didn't call it in his favor. All of the voter fraud instances, he's trying to call to attention, all of the legitimacy. He's trying to call into question the faith of the American people that he's trying to sway away from our institutions. None of that would happen if he was ahead in the vote count in the electoral college. The media has been calling elections going back decades. I mean, infamously in 1948, a newspaper printed the wrong candidate won the election because they got the polling wrong. So the media calling the election, being involved in this process, is an American tradition. And the only reason we're hearing a lot of questions raised from the president right now was because he was not on the winning side of the equation.
There are multiple news reports now that President Trump will be organising rallies on the back of these false claims around fraud, that actually, this will look very much like a campaign on the ground. What do you make of that? And what will that do? Is it about kind of keeping his base activated? And how will that continue to divide the nation?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good move. But look, the legal strategy that the president is using now to contest some of the states and the outcomes, it's pretty flimsy. And lawyers on both sides of the aisles have recognized this. So what these rallies look like, frankly, it looks like a late fundraising push, a way of stacking the coffers a little bit more before the presidency ends. I think Trump has always enjoyed campaigning more than governing. And so in this lame duck part of his presidency, he gets to do what he loves to do most, which is go around the country and sort of be adored by his base. But to your point and your question, I think you're absolutely right that this will serve to divide the nation at a time when we really should be coming together as the administration's transition. It's not going to be helpful, and I am certain the rhetoric is going to be more damaging than the rallies themselves.
Senator Lindsey Graham warned that President Trump should not concede defeat, in part because Republicans will never be able to elect another president from their party again. Is there any evidence that that's the case?
No, not at all. Even with as bad of a candidate as Trump was in terms of unifying, he lost this election by very slim margins in a number of states. So Republicans are quite competitive. They picked up seats in the legislative chamber. So what Lindsey Graham, I think, he's trying to do two things. Number one is keep his seat next to power. And the only way that happens is if the president stays in the White House. So I think some of this is self-interest. But what he's also doing is tacitly admitting that Republicans on message, on their policies, on their agenda, their principles are not competitive in the United States. And that's not a problem for American people. That's a problem for the Republican Party. So if he thinks that the party can no longer win presidential elections, then the party should be doing some introspection about their policy agenda and who exactly they're excluding from the party tent, when they're out campaigning and trying to win.
Do you see Donald Trump delivering a concession speech? And what's the history of the concession speech in the United States? How do you envisage that?
Yeah, I don't see it happening at all. He's not a good loser. I think the series of rallies that he does, it will be doing next week and probably will continue doing even after his presidency ends, will show that he will never defeat, even after he's out of the White House. As far as concession speeches go, they have no constitutional or legal authority or basis. It's just a normative gesture that's been around for about a century. And every president since it started about a century ago has done this just to show the American people that the transfer of power will be peaceful, and so that they'll play their part in being a, sort of an honorable loser and adhering to the American identity more to their partisan one.
I suppose the response of the many people who voted for him is key here. Is it a divisive issue that he hasn't conceded? I mean, even the people who voted for him, is there a cohort that think that it's time to actually concede?
Yes, there is. And my guess is that it's probably more than half of the people that voted for him are ready for him to accept the fact that he lost and for the country to move forward. Now, there is a very passionate small percentage, I think, of his base that are the loudest. And they're the ones that make it seem like we are more divided than we are, that the Republican Party writ large is unwilling to accept the results, or Republicans are unwilling to. And I think that's a bit overblown. I think because the president is feeding into this notion that he will not concede and that the election was rigged, the small contingent that's the most vocal is getting the most attention. But I think the vast majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle recognize this outcome and are ready for the president to accept it, for sure.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, and the role she's going to play. She obviously played a pretty key role when those speeches were delivered, introducing Joe Biden to the stage, but also really giving a very strong speech herself. How key will her role be in this administration? And is it about succession planning?
So I think it will be very key. One, that she was essential to the victory. Her presence on the ticket, I'm certain, drove up black turnout nationwide, and black turnout in 4 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. It's the reason Joe Biden won those states and ultimately won the presidency. Now, as vice president, we're almost waiting to see how important her role will be. There are 2 runoff elections in the U.S. Senate that are going to happen in the state of Georgia over the next few weeks. Now, if the Democrats win those seats, it'll be a 50-50 tie in the Senate, and Kamala Harris, as vice president, will be the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. So if Democrats already have the House, they have the tie-breaking vote in the Senate and the White House, they will have 2 years where the Biden-Harris administration can push forward just about anything they want to. She will be key in ensuring the Senate is sort of aligned to that plan. As far as succession, it remains to be seen, but you know how it works here in the United States. 2 years before the election happens, people start announcing. So it's 2020. I suspect by early 2023, we're going to know what Kamala Harris's plans. But I wouldn't, if I were her, I wouldn't be measuring the drapes in the Oval Office just yet. There's quite a bit of work to be done.
Just finally, and President-elect mentioned this in his speech, it's been a big year for the Black Lives Matter movement and for these issues around racial injustice. He used a particular term which was, systemic racism, and that he believed that systemic racism needed to be addressed. How historically significant is that, and what might it mean for the way that administration deals with some of these issues?
It's tremendously significant. Hillary Clinton 4 years ago was one of the first ever to use that phrase on the campaign trail. Certainly Barack Obama talked about it, but it was often after he was as president. The only time we really talked about racism prior to that is the more insidious personal kind of hatred that, everyone categorically rejects, except for a very fringe element there. So I think the fact that he talked about it is significant. What remains to be seen is if the policies that his administration puts in place does things to reduce the socioeconomic inequalities along lines of race that we see in the United States that are a product of structural racism. The one thing he's going to have to guard against is to ensure that the quest to reduce the impact of structural racism isn't hijacked by those who want racism to only be the bad words that people say to one another or how people feel in their hearts. There are institutional structural issues that need addressing. I think Biden-Harris will have to stay focused on that goal if they ever want to make a dent.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.